Psychedelics. Psychedelic. We're talking about drugs today, apparently. All right. So this is a really interesting topic, and I'm going to admit at the outset that I know a little bit, but I have not done anywhere close to the level of reading and research that I wish to, but that's coming. So just like I said with the marijuana, let's just look and see in the future, and I'll come back, I'll do videos about it and so forth. So psychedelics, if any of you are fans of the Joe Rogan podcast, he talks about psychedelics a lot, and a lot of his guests do as well, and they've had various psychedelic experiences, and that's just kind of been part of it for them. So let's define what we're talking about. So psychedelics, LSD is kind of one that everybody knows about. DMT, which is dimethyltryptamine, that's one of Joe Rogan's favorites. Ayahuasca is one you'll hear him talk about, a South American brew where they put in these different chemicals. I think that's actually DMT as well. People will talk about Moses and the burning bush being the acacia bush, and that has DMT in it. Then, so the mushrooms, tripping on shrooms, right? Psilocybin is with that particular chemical. MDMA, which is ecstasy. All of these are kind of in that psychedelic realm, all right? And this gets tossed around a lot, not just because people like drugs and people like to get high and feel high and so forth, but does it have medical use? And this one, much faster than marijuana, gets dismissed by the medical community, and I think it ought not. And here's why. Very little research done on that compared to marijuana, but there definitely is some research, and that's what I mean. I haven't done all the reading that I want to, so I'm going to give you kind of what I know, and then we'll just keep talking about it. But so the general concept, and there have been studies done with people with PTSD and with psychedelics that seems to be really, really helpful. The general concept, in the layman's terms, is that it helps to rewire the brain. Well, that sounds like BS, right? So we're going to rewire the brain. All right, sure. And we're right back to where we are with the anti-marijuana people saying, you guys just want to get high and you'll just use any excuse you can to use drugs and get high and so forth. I see where they're coming from, because we think LSD, right, the blue stars and Forrest Gump and Jenny Trippin and everyone talking about that. How could it possibly be helpful? How could it possibly rewire your brain? I mean, what does that even mean? So the mechanism is not exactly known, and I'm not going to sit here and act like I'm some neurologist or neurochemist and know that, but we've all heard about acid flashbacks, right? And the general idea of acid flashbacks is that other neural pathways in your brain are kind of opened by that experience. And it must have to do with different neurotransmitters firing at great levels. And that is something that's been observed. So LSD flashbacks are a thing. ECT, shock therapy, one of the theories behind that is that by shocking your brain, it has tons and tons and tons and tons of neurochemicals released, and somehow that kind of resets the brain like a computer. You know, when you hold down the switch and it turns off, you turn it back on, it goes, why'd you do that? You shouldn't do that. It resets it somehow. So these are things we actually have observed. So don't let the naysayers kind of just talk you out of it. It certainly could be possible. Here is where I think science and the rubber will meet the road here. The people who will say what I just said is nonsense. You can't rewire your brain. You're not going to open new pathways. Even if you could, how would you prove that and so forth? The mechanism of PTSD, and I'm an Air Force veteran. I've worked with lots of veterans. I was the chief resident of psychiatry at the VA in Iowa City, my senior year of residency. I have done a lot of work with PTSD. Veterans, rape victims, kids that are bullied. We're seeing more and more legit PTSD symptoms from kids being cyberbullied and bullied in a way that we didn't see in my generation. And I mean, you guys have all heard the statistics about the suicide rate. I mean, this is a very real thing. So we can't just throw that away. But anyway, so PTSD itself rewires your brain. That stress, and the stress prolonged. So the traumatic event can be quick, but the stress over time, that rewires your brain. How so? Let me give you an example. So in a military setting, when you're deployed in a war, PTSD keeps you alive. So we think about the symptoms of PTSD: hyper-awareness, hyper-arousal, irritability, people jumpy at loud noises, bang, oh, what was that? And always looking around, head on a swivel, not sleeping well, quick to fight. Think about if you're on the streets of Afghanistan or Iraq and you're an American soldier clearing houses looking for terrorists, keeping your head on a swivel and constantly trying to figure out where am I and is somebody going to shoot me, that keeps you alive. The problem is when you get back home, there's not an awful lot of Al-Qaeda at the mall wherever it is that you live. So then you've got this hyper-awareness, hyper-arousal. People come up behind you. You want to fight them. Your kids make a loud noise in the night, and you're up walking patrol because somebody may be, taking out your family. One of my very favorite doctors in residency talked about when he got back, he'd see piles of leaves on the side of the road, like in Iowa in the fall, and he was convinced it was an IED. And it took him a long time to figure out it was just a pile of leaves and not something that would kill him and his family. So that is rewiring the brain, and then therapy plus medicine, but mostly therapy, especially EMDR, which is a fascinating therapy. If any of you don't know what EMDR is, look it up. So with this rapid eye movement back and forth, it lets you access the memory in some way, and the chemical pathway somehow will help to bring the trauma out and then deal with it. I'm not an EMDR therapist. I've only seen it on video. Fascinating. So that is also rewiring. So why would it be different to use a chemical process? And that's where I think that the psychedelic experience used medicinally and with regulation behind it, so we're not just getting some mushroom that this is going to do it, or some brown liquid that a shaman gave you. I mean, okay, fine. Let's be medical and scientific and make sure it's pure and make sure that we're dosing it with milligrams or so forth. Great, let's do all of that. But it could be very, very helpful. There are so many stories of people, especially it seems like with DMT trips, although I admit I'm a little skewed because I listen to the Joe Rogan podcast, and especially him and Duncan Trussell, always talking about DMT and ayahuasca. I've never done any of that, I admit, never come close, never been offered to me. They really talk about you come back from the trip a different person, and you see the world differently, and there's all these stories about people turning their lives around and realizing whatever else is out there, or simply their connection to humanity. And that's not a bad thing for people who would be depressed, would feel alone. PTSD, absolutely. Learn to think in a new way. I think that could be great. So, much like I said with marijuana, and why are we cutting off these routes of research that could be so helpful and no more harmful? You guys know I prescribe medicines every day. That's what I do for a job. These drugs, for the most part, are not going to be more harmful than a lot of the prescription medicines. The side effects are going to be less and less and less, especially if we can regulate it and track it and so forth. So I don't know why we're cutting ourselves off from that, but thank you for the question. I usually don't get asked about psychedelics, so I do think it's very, very interesting, and again, thanks for the question.